Thanks for tuning into another edition of Another Dolphins Podcast. We all hope everyone had a great Christmas and is enjoying a wonderful holiday season. I've got Kat with me. No, he's not in a drive-thru, but he is joining us from the car, so he deserves a big shout out for that. And before we dig into Week 17, which features the Miami Dolphins and the Cleveland Browns, Kat, I wanted to ask you, last week's win had a few interesting storylines, so do you have any final thoughts on Miami's 29-17 win over the San Francisco 49ers?
I'm glad the Dolphins could finally establish a running game. I mean, Devon Achane with a fantastic performance, best of the year, 190 all-purpose yards, 1,340 on the season. And it shows what the Dolphins can do on the ground when they have even above-average offensive line play. On the right side, Isaiah Wynn is rotating in throughout the game, and Kendall Lamb they get back. So you compare that to last week with Liam Eichenberg and Jackson Carman getting absolutely destroyed. That made a huge difference. So I'm interested to see what happens this week. I think the more Isaiah Win, the better, and we'll see what happens against a Browns defensive front. Well, even though the Browns in general aren't a very good team, their defensive line is pretty good.
That is really going to make for an interesting matchup. And I have a couple news notes I want to get your thoughts on before we really dive into this matchup. First and foremost, this was just kind of had me rolling my eyes, almost got stuck in the back of my head. The Dolphins have released linebacker, Shaq Barrett. This was kind of a unique scenario where he retired in July. He had a family tragedy that he was dealing through. No one really blamed him for that. But then he announced he wanted to return to the NFL 2 days before the deadline, that he could be re-enlisted into the NFL. Didn't tell anyone. And then the Dolphins ultimately decided to keep him from not being activated. They wanted to see how some different defensive ends were doing. So, Kat, were you surprised to see this is how this scenario ended with Shaq Barrett, considering that now that the Miami Dolphins officially released him, they do lose his rights going into next season?
It's a complicated situation because he lost a child in March, and he also retired 9 days before training camp started. So I was conflicting those two things for him. And look, normally when somebody agrees to a contract in March, then a certain amount of time happens, and then 9 days before training camp they retire. That rubs me the wrong way. And then I walked myself out of that because I thought, okay, a lot of family problems, I understand. But then the timing of it, where a couple of weeks ago, okay, suddenly I want to come back into the NFL.
Yep.
When the Dolphins suck. At that point, I really think the timing of it gets me to the point where I don't have a lot of remorse for Shaq Barrett, given, I mean, I have remorse for his family situation, but I don't have remorse for the fact that he's not going to play this year. And I'm fine with the Dolphins having their hands clean in the whole situation.
There is a scenario where Shaq Barrett can play this year, so he's going on Friday while we're recording this podcast, actually. And if he is not cleared, or if he does clear waivers, then he can sign with any team freely and he is available to play this season. However, if a team claims him on waivers, they will basically have the Miami Dolphins contract, and they will have that for next season. So there was a really weird announcement through Schefter where Drew Rosenhaus said, hey, we appreciate the Dolphins and we're really hoping that no team claims Barrett so he can choose where he plays and returns to action this year. Kat, I'm 100% with you that I think it's so unfair where I think he announced his return about an hour before Anthony Weaver had a press conference, and Anthony Weaver was asked during the press conference, and that was him actually learning that Shaq Barrett wanted to return to the NFL 2 days before the deadline. I think that's very unfair, especially when you need to enable to dance. You need both partners to kind of be on the relatively the same page. That felt pretty unfair. And I saw some takes on Twitter. Kat, I want to get your thoughts on, does this reek at all of like Drew Rosenhaus having a lot of power with the Miami Dolphins and Chris Grier specifically? You know, all offseason, we spoke a lot about how great it was for Chris Grier to be at every table if the Dolphins didn't trade for every star. Is this the drawback, or is this another scenario where like Chris Grier might have played his hand a little too much and all of a sudden agents can kind of have a little bit of free will?
I think this might be a relationship building type of scenario here with Drew Rosenhaus, if I were to guess on that. But as far as Shaq Barrett's concerned, if he had said, even during the regular season, if he had communicated with the Dolphins, he had a change of heart.
Exactly.
He had family issues. I want to come back. Can I come back? I think the Dolphins would have had a discussion with him whether it was to play for the Dolphins or with another team. But the Dolphins learned about this. If they're being honest, they've learned about this through the news, and that is unacceptable from Shaq Barrett's point of view. And as far as I'm concerned, 9 days before training camp, he quit. Period.
On top of that, he was on the Kay Adams show like early in the season talking about if he was to return to the NFL, the only team he'd play for is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, it was just so tone deaf and it's so frustrating. And it just kills me that we have these scenarios where these players kind of trying to just sneak out of all these different situations. And us as Dolphin fans, we just got to smile and take it. I think that's really been something that's bothered me throughout this entire thing, that we have no power, that the Dolphins just kind of get it walked over. And us as fans, we just got to smile it and eat the crap, for lack of better words.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Look, Shaq Barrett has been a really good pro, and I think he's handled this entire situation poorly, period. And you know, he's going to go to another team next year. He'll be 33 years old. He'll probably play another year in the league, and then he's going to be out of the NFL. You know, it's tragic what happened to his child. Tragic, but it doesn't mean he also handled the situation correctly either.
Bradley Chubb's practice window has officially closed. The Miami Dolphins decided not to activate the Pro Bowl edge rusher. Kat, we spoke about this a little bit last week, so it wasn't really much of a surprise to see the Dolphins kind of choose to say, all right, Bradley Chubb, let's give you the entire year. Let's rest you up for next year. But how you feeling in terms of his return next year, based on just kind of the conversations we're hearing from the coaching staff and things like that?
Yeah, we'll see what the contract situation plays out as, but I'm glad that he's not returning this year for the final two games, when the Dolphins have a minuscule chance of making the playoffs. I went back at 6'5", 270 pounds, as the 11 sack, 6 forced fumble guy that he was in 2023 before he had a terrible injury. So yeah, I want him back, and I want him healthy next year. And coming back for the final two games would not have interested me that much. And I want to see what Quentin Bell has too on the opposite edge. And also Cameron Good coming back too. I want to see what these guys have, because if you can bring a Chop Robinson and a Quentin Bell and a Cameron Good, and then you bring back Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb next year, now you might have some identity on defense.
Another player that I thought, Mike McDaniel was asked about a few players, and we're reaching the end of the season where you're kind of having the debate of, are you're going to rest players? Something that I thought was really interesting is that Mike McDaniel said he would absolutely love to have Terron Armstead back next year. Kat, this is something we are going to talk about a bunch, I feel, during the offseason. But just real quick, if Armstead wanted to come back next year, can you really, I know the injury issues, can you can you say no to that talent? Someone who's so great, not only as a pass protector, but a run blocker as well?
No, I want Terron Armstead back next year if he's willing to play.
I like that.
No doubt about it. I mean, you're talking about one of the best offensive tackles in the league. And usually when you talk about a 33, 34-year-old quarterback, left tackle, you're talking about somebody who's usually broken down. Terron Armstead's not that way. He's big, he's agile, and when he's out on the field, he is a difference-making left tackle. He shuts down pass rushers and also can get out into space. It's kind of a rare situation. So I'm glad the Dolphins have Patrick Paul in the wings, but Terron Armstead is a top 5 tackle in the league when he's healthy.
Who is I think he's still Jason Peters. I kind of look at him, he was in the league for so long, being one of those monster. Isaiah McKenzie, the last name, he played for the Hurricanes and he was with the Dolphins for 1 year. There were these left tackles who were in the league for so long, and they were kind of these mountains of men. And the thing about them was they kind of, I don't want anyone to take this wrong way, but they kind of just stood there, right? They were great pass protectors. But what Terron Armstead does as a run blocker, his ability to get to the second level, despite all the injuries, despite the age, I think that's why we need to have such a conversation. This isn't somebody who's out there and you're trying to work around his weaknesses. When he's out there, you're playing to his strengths. He's somebody who makes your football team better every week. Very interesting conversation to have moving
Jason
forward.
Peters is, I think he is 8 years older than Terron Armstead, and he's still in the league.
It's crazy.
No, excuse me. He was on a practice squad last year. I think he's actually out of the league now. But he's somebody when Calais Campbell was available at his age, that was the guy I compared him to as far as his longevity. Like, how can you tell somebody that, okay, you can't do it at 38, but you can do it at 39, or you can't do it at 39, but you can do it at 38? It's kind of that situation. So yeah, Jason Peters is a rare breed, and so is Calais Campbell. And Armstead, I think if he comes back, he's going to have one more year to give at an elite level, and then he's going to be done.
I completely agree with you. So this is a Miami Dolphins offense that has scored at least 29 points in 4 of the last 6 games, and they're facing a Cleveland Brown defense. And simple conversation to have. Myles Garrett, I think he leads the league with 18 tackles for a loss. He has 11 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. And last week, we saw the Dolphins for the first time this season break 100 rushing yards in the game. So, Cat, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, 2 guys who are both questionable entering this matchup. Is this a scenario where you could see Mike McDaniel maybe scheming? And I know I'm using that very loosely because it's very hard to scheme around someone like Myles Garrett. But do you feel that the rushing attack can be another strength for the Dolphins this week?
Yeah, I mean, after Myles Garrett, there's really not a lot left on the Browns defense. I mean, they had Zadarius Smith, but they traded him. And outside of him, you don't have a guy with more than 3 sacks on the season. And as in terms of turnovers, the Browns have allowed 23 passing touchdowns to 4 interceptions. So to me, this is a game that, with the Dolphins coming off a really good running game against the 49ers, it's tempting for us to say that, come out and just cream this team. But this might be a game that you have to win 17-7 or 20-10 and kind of lean on them more and more, given those circumstances.
The Browns are 3-12. Don't get me wrong. They're not a good football team. Does this game do anything towards the cold weather narratives that the Dolphins have to face, do you think?
I never looked at it as a cold weather thing. I looked at it as a Dolphins can't beat good teams type of thing. And that, unfortunately, unless they get into the playoffs this year, and to do that, the Broncos are going to have to lose this weekend. The Chargers are going to have to lose this weekend. Until the Dolphins reverse that, they're probably not going to have an opportunity to reverse that trend until next year. And that's what sucks so bad about them losing to the Texans. 1-17 in the last 27 months against playoff teams. And I don't know how you overcome that this year, even if you beat the Browns and you beat the Jets here in the final 2 weeks.
The Browns, the Jets, 2 teams that are not great, right? It's games the Miami Dolphins are projected to win. I'm really interested to see, especially on the offensive side of the football, for an offense that's been so up and down with different players out of the lineup. Waddle dealing with his injury. Mike McDaniel's optimistic that he could be available. Tyreek Hill, Mike McDaniel's saying he had the best week of practice ever. And then you just have, oh, by the way, Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane combining for 12 receptions, 132 yards last week. I just would like to see over these final couple games, if, the Dolphins don't reach the playoffs, a strong identity on offense. These teams, the Browns, the Jets, they are not good football teams. I'd love to see some sort of scenario where the Dolphins can prove, like, we have stars across the board. We paid our franchise quarterback. We paid Tyreek Hill. I'd love to just see some scenarios where you have some great game-breaking plays, which you should have against bad teams.
Yeah, you should. And what I liked glimpses of last week is you see Jeff Wilson on 3rd and 2.
Yes.
Get a first down. You see Isaiah Wilson play, or Isaiah Wynn play NFL capable right guard play. And sealing off the block for Devon Achane late in the game for a 50-yard run. That's the type of identity the Dolphins, to me, had the opportunity to establish here in the season. And they didn't. They just kept playing small ball throughout. And then when they played a decent team, they got punched in the mouth by that decent team. So it's my hope that, because I do think at this point, Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer are going to be back next year. That's my belief. And if they do, hopefully they take some lessons away from this. That that you have to establish some sort of power element in your game, which they showed glimpses of doing against the 49ers. So we'll see if that continues in this game and see if they carry that to next year.
God, hearing that Greer might be back just makes me sad. I understand it, especially the way the contracts were handed out last year. It's really hard just to kind of break free. And if you get rid of one, I understand the idea of wanting to get rid of everyone. Are there any other younger players that you're hoping maybe in these next couple of weeks can really change our opinion on the offensive side of the ball? That's kind of the issue with the Dolphins right now. There aren't a lot of younger players. I instantly kind of look at tight end. I don't really see any hope there. Maybe get Jalen Wright a little more involved. But I mean, even then, Raheem Mostert, he's one of the few guys under contract next year too. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the mix. And I necessarily wouldn't be against it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, if we're making the assumption that the Dolphins aren't going to make the playoffs, and they, if the Chargers and the Broncos both lose this weekend, the Dolphins have a chance. They do. Those odds increase. But let's take that out of the equation. Yeah, I think there are some young players that could step up. Malik Washington's one. Julian Hill is somebody who I think is a fantastic blocker and should be on the field a lot more than Durham Smythe. And Julian Hill has cut down his penalties recently. I'll go a step further. I want to see Julian Hill on the field way more than Alec Ingold, who I feel is a useless football player. On the defensive side of the ball, if you're telling me that the Dolphins are going to go cheap at a position next year, I would like for it to be cornerback.
Yep.
Yeah, I would like for it to be Storm Duck and Kader Kohu on the outside, and maybe kick Jalen Ramsey inside to a slot corner or free safety. So yeah, there are some players that can step up here, some young players. Not as many as other teams have, but really the cornerback position is the one I'm looking at. I want to see Kader Kohu have another great game here, which he's had the last two games. And Storm Duck had a rough last outing, but I think the potential is there.
Anthony Weaver had some praise for Storm Duck that kind of caught my attention too. And another thing, he really just skipped right over someone like Ethan Bonner, who was playing, in the playoffs for the Dolphins last year. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind too. I'd love to get your thoughts on this quote. Javon Holland on last Sunday's win versus San Francisco 49ers. This is from the podcast he does with Cam Wolf. I only have the clip here from Finn's Extra, so my apologies. I don't have the name of the podcast. Defense, I thought, was playing very hard. I myself was really trying to play hard. This is probably the hardest I have played in a while. I was drained. I don't know how I feel about a player in a contract year saying at 6-8, this was the hardest I played all year. That kind of just made me a little sick, and I wanted to wait till I saw you on camera so I could see your reaction to that.
Javon Holland's had a bad year, and every time he's in the open field, he's missed tackles. And let me look at the stat sheet. Let's see. He had a forced fumble in week 1, and since then he's had nothing.
Yep.
He hasn't made any plays. He's missed many of them. Because of his age, he's only 24 years old. I do think he's going to get paid handsomely this offseason by somebody. And I hope it's not the Dolphins. And I hope this becomes a Christian Wilkins situation where the Dolphins get a 3rd or 4th round comp pick for him.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested to see how that goes because wasn't it Justin Simmons who was free agent, seemed like till training camp started, and then he eventually signed with the Falcons on a 1-year deal. So I'm really, but then at the other side you have Brandon Jones making all of our eyes fall out when we see him getting a monster contract from the Broncos. So there are both sides of the coin to that. That's super interesting. Kat, what are your expectations to see Dorian Thompson-Robinson, a 2023 5th-round pick, 3 interceptions over the last 2 weeks, no touchdowns. Man, this kind of feels like the Titans game in the sense of I think I'd rather have Dorian Thompson-Robinson instead of Jameis Winston, just like I'd rather have Will Levis instead of Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, DTR has on the season no touchdowns, 5 interceptions in the last 2 games. So a quarterback rating of 30.1. Yeah, this is, and not to mention the Browns have nothing on offense other than really Jerry Jeudy that's clicking on any level. They can't run the ball. They can't protect the quarterback. They can't throw it. This is a game where if the Browns come out and put up even 20 points, I think that really becomes an embarrassment for the Dolphins defense. I mean, you just take a look at the last 3 games, 27 points scored for the Browns.
The one player that scares me a little bit, Nick Chubb, he's done for the year. It was great to see him fight back after his brutal knee injury last year. And I think he's just been dealt some hard luck where he actually, I think, is dealing with a foot injury now. He's on injured reserve. But Jerome Ford actually had a huge game last week. And I could see, especially in the cold, that being a situation, a player that gives the Miami Dolphins fit. We see Jordan Brooks. He's questionable. He's been very vocal all week. And McDaniel, too, confident that he's going to be available. But we are not going to see Anthony Walker out there next to him. So could that be a scenario where maybe the Dolphins get beat up a little bit on the ground and that's how the Browns maybe find a way to generate some sort of offense?
Yeah, I mean, Jerome Ford is somebody who's a decent player. Last week, I think he had, 11 carries for 90-something yards. One of them came on a 67-yard run.
First play of the game, yeah.
Yeah, and the rest of the game, 10 carries for 30 yards. So he's a decent player. I think they should have used him more this year when they realized Nick Chubb didn't quite have it coming
Agreed.
back. But yeah, he's not somebody who terrifies me, but he is somebody who can break the long run. But as far as the Dolphins' inside linebacker position in general, I think it's been crystal clear that Jordan Brooks has been sensational when he's on the field, and he's
Absolutely.
a keeper. He's a dog. The rest of the Dolphins' inside linebackers have been awful. Anthony Walker's been a slight upgrade. David Long's not on the team anymore, even though he was a team captain at the beginning of the year. Channing Tindall still hasn't come around. Duke Riley hasn't come around. And if Anthony Weaver does come back to the Dolphins as defensive coordinator next year, I think it's vital that they get, probably in the draft, in the first or second round, an inside linebacker that can cover the field. Maybe like a Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma, a player like that. Because they keep two inside linebackers out in the field for almost every single snap, and they're one of the few teams in the NFL that does that.
I'm right there with you. I want an inside linebacker. Not great names, but I also wonder too over these last couple of weeks. Tyrell Dodson, could he maybe do something to prove, hey, you're worth a training camp spot next year? I'm not saying like a multi-year deal, but that's another thing too. Duke Riley, I think the book's kind of been written about him. Channing Tindall, he can't even see the field. So, I mean, inside linebacker, that's such a crucial position for the Miami Dolphins. But what's made it a little easier is just the impact that we see from the interior of the defense. Benito Jones has been solid. Deshaun Hand has been solid. Kat, what do you think is the biggest weakness going into next year for this defense? Because obviously they replaced Christian Wilkins only for 1 year with Calais Campbell. It's to be seen if he'll be back. Would you lean that maybe that secondary is the weakest link, or where would you look?
It's an interesting question because I say as far as needs for next year, defensive line, because they're already so thin there, and I have to operate under the assumption that Calais Campbell's not going to be back.
Right.
To me, he came here to win a championship for 1 year, and he's on a team that isn't even going to make the playoffs. And then you also factor in what Zach Sealer's been phenomenal, but in his 30s. Deshaun Hand, Benito Jones have done a really good job and durable. Hope they come back next year, but they're okay, fringe starters.
Yeah.
So, but as far as needs are concerned, it's inside linebacker next to Jordan Brooks has been a problem all year. Edge has actually been a lot more, has been a lot better ever since Chop Robinson has stepped up.
Mm-hmm.
And at the cornerback spot, Jalen Ramsey, if he stays and plays at this level, he's going to be fine. But I tend to think he's going to eventually move inside to safety, if not next year, the year after.
And I think it makes a lot of sense for them to do that, moving Jalen Ramsey inside too. I always wonder about Steeler because he's having another career year. Kat, would the best way to be improving this defense really, I don't think is it dumb to say I don't want to do the defensive tackle thing again? I think we saw the peak, what that can be with someone like Christian Wilkins. And I think we just saw time and time again, you need help at linebacker. You need help at safety. I just wonder if maybe you could get a great defensive tackle, and I'm not saying they wouldn't be impactful, but I think if you want to go to have an elite defense, go from good to not great defense, I wonder if defensive tackle would be the wrong way to go.
Yeah, it depends. I think the one position that they're not going to get is edge because Chop Robinson and Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips, plus Quentin Bell probably coming back. That combination I think is going to be pretty good. And usually I wouldn't ask for another inside linebacker, but if they're going to keep playing these guys on every single snap, then I think they should. But defensive
Makes
line,
sense.
even when you look at Dolphins, are really lucky that they haven't had a major injury to Calais Campbell, Zach Sealer, Benito Jones, or Deshaun Hand. Because after that, who's the Dolphins' fifth defensive lineman? They've been rotating a bunch of players that they've been peeling off the street. So it really depends on where the Dolphins pick, and that kind of depends on who they'll take in general in the draft.
Back to Sunday. So Chop Robinson has 6 sacks. Zach Sealer leads the team with 8.5. DTR, maybe some Jameis Winston action if he struggles. And then you have Tyrod Taylor and Aaron Rodgers in week 18. I assume it's going to be Aaron Rodgers, but he always complains about stuff. Jalen Phillips ended his rookie year, Cat, with 8.5 sacks. And they came in clusters. He had 3-week span with 4.5 sacks. And I think Chop's kind of been the same way. And I don't think you expect a rookie defensive end to, hit the ground running and get a sack every week. Does he break Jalen Phillips' sack record by getting 3 sacks over these final 2 weeks?
It's funny. I was asking myself heading into the show, is it possible that Chop Robinson gets to double digits, gets to 10 sacks on the year?
It's possible.
It is possible. That speaks more to the Browns and the Jets offensive tackle situations than it does Chop Robinson. But yeah, Chop Robinson. You're talking about somebody who, after the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season, we thought this was starting to look like a useless football player because he was undersized. He wasn't getting into the backfield. What is this guy good for? And now, when he lines up, he's at the very least being extremely disruptive on the outside. So can he close for 3 or 4 sacks? We'll see. That's something that would be great to head into next season with when we're looking for glimpses for Chop Robinson to be a 9 or 10 sack guy.
We're rooting for the Chargers to lose. We are rooting for the Broncos to lose. But Kat, this is a question that might not be right for right now, but when we look back on the 2024 season and everything that's happened, even if the Dolphins are eliminated from playoff contention, a win Sunday has Miami 60 minutes away from a 5th straight winning season. Does that matter at all?
Not really to me. I think honestly it would confuse the narrative that this is a team that's just very, very close to. I think the narrative heading into the offseason is that if Tua had not missed 4+ games, the Dolphins would be in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And while that might be true, that doesn't mean Tua's not injury prone heading into the future. It doesn't mean that this team doesn't have issues. And this team is going to continue to lose more players heading into the offseason. My question is, how do the Dolphins find an identity in the offseason with the limited resources that they have? Does that mean that you get another inside linebacker in the draft in the 1st or 2nd round to pair with Jordan Brooks and with Chop Robinson and with Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb coming back? Does that mean that you stock up on guards in the 1st and 2nd rounds of the draft, and now you protect Tua Tagovailoa? What identity are they going to establish so they're not playing the small ball in 2025?
Playing small ball with bubble gum and sticks, it seems like at times. And this is going to be another season like last year where I believe, or right around 50% of the roster is about to be a free agent. So that's when we kind of have the conversation of, does this matter too much? Because we thought last offseason that despite having all this turnover, the Dolphins were going to win in the margins. And time after time, whether it's Jordan Poyer, just there was a handful of different free agent signings that didn't work. So I'm really interested to see how someone like Stephen Ross looks at this offseason, because I think that the Dolphins are in the same spot entering this offseason as they were last season, where you have so much turnover. You have some things that do work, but is it enough to get you to, 13 wins where the Buffalo Bills aren't locking up the division at the beginning of December? I'm not entirely sure, but I think that's a really interesting conversation.
It is. And we talked about in the offseason when they signed Jonnu Smith, who has had a fantastic season. Looks like a great player in this offense. But they signed Jonnu Smith. They signed Odell Beckham. They didn't get a big running back. They traded a future pick for Jalen Wright. They leaned further into this idea that they were going to be this small ball, fast football team. And in general, it didn't work. So my question is, are they going to try to get bigger? Are they going to try to lean further in to that idea that we're going to be smarter and different than other teams in the NFL?
What do you think?
That we're going to be, and up to this point, it hasn't worked. I really think the Dolphins need, if I were just to pick something out of the sky and say that this is going to happen and this is what needs to happen, they need to protect Tua to the point where he has an A-plus offensive line. But I just don't think they have the resources to make that happen.
You'd have to do something really wacky, like say, all right, we're going to ignore defensive tackle. We're going to flat up ignore linebacker and use like your draft pick and the minimal cap space you have at that spot. I think that'd be the only way. Kat, another one is for the players, for the locker room, for everyone in general. It's the Browns and the Jets. But would winning no, actually it wouldn't matter because you don't see this as a cold weather issue for this team. It's all strictly about losing to good teams. So even if you come out and you win, let's say the next 2 games with a 30-point differential, that doesn't give you any sort of better taste entering next season.
I mean, winning is always better than losing. That's the best way I can put that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't get over, and I can't minimize the fact that when I look at just the last, let's say they finish the season with wins. I'm going to look at the last, the game since they lost to the Bills to go to 2-6. Okay, they beat the Rams, which actually looks pretty impressive now. They beat the Raiders at home. They beat the Patriots at home. They beat the Jets at home. They beat the ailing 49ers at home. And then if you finish with wins over the Browns and Jets, objectively, does that look impressive heading into the offseason? I would have to say no. But when you consider that, is that better than finishing the year 7-10? Then yeah, I think it would be.
God, just looking at even Miami's home record, you just underline that 5-3 at home. This is a team that's so used to going 8-0, 7-1, different things like that. Kat, finally here before we wrap up, you've been an absolute trooper joining us in the car. I know you're dealing with some internet issues at your house. How you feeling about this game? Do you think the Dolphins kind of keep the good vibes rolling here to end the season with another win?
Yeah, I do think that they'll win this game here. To me, the Browns have 2 weeks left here, and a DTR starting in this game with no touchdowns and 5 interceptions, and really not a lot. Browns don't have a lot left to offer here throughout the year. It would be an embarrassing loss for the Dolphins if they were not to take this down. I think this is going to be a snoozer, to be honest with you, and it should be a snoozer. The worst thing that you could do here is come out in this game if you're the Dolphins and you're trying to win and try to blow the doors off the thing. So I'm going to go 20-7 Dolphins.
I like that. Even like that Brown or the Seahawks Bears game from Thursday night. Let's give it a nice 6-3 type feel. I don't think it will be that bad. I want to just see this Dolphins offense get some bread and butter plays going. Maybe a couple big plays in the cold. Maybe Tyreek Hill, who has had a great week at practice. Maybe that means something. I don't necessarily know. 24-6, a couple of field goals. Miami's red zone defense has always been good. Let's get Chop Robinson a couple sacks. But Kat, I won't keep you any longer. Thank you so much for joining me on Another Dolphins podcast. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us. We will be back early next week to recap Miami's game in Cleveland against the Browns. But until then, have a wonderful weekend. And most importantly, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.